Hi, I'm Anna Hoffman from the Azure Data team. Welcome to this Ask the Expert session where we'll be answering all your questions about .NET App Modernization and Migration from end to end using data migration tools and Azure SQL. Hopefully this is a session you just saw, but otherwise you can catch it later and you can still get your questions answered in this session. Before we get into the experts and the Q&A session, I want to go through a few housekeeping and tips. First is the tips. So how do you engage with our experts? You can use the chat to ask questions, and you can also use like the thumbs up button to upvote questions you really want to see an answer on camera. One thing to note is once you ask your question and we publish it, it will be visible to all the attendees. Additionally, some questions will be answered over the chat and some questions will be answered over the camera. We have experts on camera and off camera to answer all of your questions. Finally, some etiquette things. This session might be recorded, so please make sure you're okay with that. And to help our moderators, please try not to spam or troll in our question area. Please use it for questions and please keep those comments appropriate. We want to adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct, and really the reason we do this is to create a respectful, friendly, fun, and inclusive experience for everyone. So with all that out of the way, I want to go ahead and introduce our wonderful experts. I think I have this right. I think all of these experts have been working at Microsoft with SQL for at least 15 years, and I think maybe all of them are very close or over 20 years. So we have some great experts on camera. We also have some great experts and leaders from our team in the chat. So just to introduce our on-camera experts, we have Mukesh, who's a Principal Group Software Engineering Manager. We have Raj, a Principal Program Manager, and we have Ajay, a Principal Group PM Manager. So we have some great experts. And before we get into the Q&A, the last thing we're going to do is give a quick summary of the session that just happened related to this. So for that, I'm going to pass it over to Raj.
Thank you so much, Anna. I want to quickly summarize what Mukesh and I presented in the previous session. The session name was .NET App Modernization and Migration from End to End using data migration tools and Azure SQL. And then we're going to be releasing it for Q&A. Mukesh talked about various Microsoft investments, tools, programs, and migration guide to streamline customer migrations to Azure SQL. He also spent time around migration project lifecycle and how Microsoft investments really help you to taking that migration journey. And in the other half of the session, I gave an end-to-end demo using Microsoft data migration tools like Azure Migrate, DMA, and DMS, and migrated .NET application to Azure Web Service and the database to the managed SQL instance. So that is kind of a summary that I want to really outline. And now I'm going to pass it back to Anna. Thank you.
Thanks, Raj. We have some resources here that you can check out now or later if you want to learn more. We'll also put up this slide at the end of the session. So with that, we're going to get right into our questions. We already have some questions coming through. This first question I'm going to ask is, when migrating data to Azure, when should I use something like Azure Data Disk over ExpressRoute? So this is a potentially complex question, and maybe it depends, but I think I'm going to pass it over to Mukesh for an answer.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks for asking this question, Greg. The decision again depends on what exactly customer is trying to do. Azure Data Disk as well as ExpressRoute, both are viable options. Like as you might be knowing, Azure Data Disk is for your one-time large data transfer and then restore. And then our ExpressRoute, using our replication and other techniques, you can do the just-in-time continuous sync one time as well as near real-time CDC as well. So different use cases, depending on the problem statement, we can use one versus other. Back to you, Anna.
Thanks, Mukesh. Okay, so a question I see a lot during the previous session and just generally is, can you tell me about how you can take the tools that you shared during the session and actually automate migrations across my data estate? So if I'm doing more than one SQL server that I want to migrate, Raj, is that something you can help with?
Sure, thank you so much. That's a great question, actually. So whatever that you have seen through our UI experience throughout the session that when we demoed the .NET application migration and database migration to Azure Managed Instance, throughout the discovery aspects and finding out the app dependencies and then finding the assessments of the databases and then doing the migrations, all those activities you can completely automate using our REST APIs and then PowerShell commandlets. So that you can really automate those migrations, that you can really run your migrations across your data estate and then data centers. Actually, we have several number of customers that we really helped them to automate this whole process and migrating 10,000 databases, 8,000 databases in very recent days, that we were able to migrate them in number of batches by doing the complete automation. So in case if you are really looking for some kind of an automation, please feel free to reach out to us. We are more than happy to help. And most of these automation document is very well documented in our documentation links, as well as you see on the screen, that you can really leverage and then try automating those migrations. Back to you, Anna.
Thanks, Raj. We have another question, an anonymous question. It is, what resources would you recommend for someone new to Azure SQL? For this one, I'm going to pass it to Ajay. Can you take that one?
Yes, thanks, Anna. So Azure SQL has plenty of deployment choices. You can have everything from IaaS, which is a fully customer controlled environment, to PaaS, where we have multiple choices as database as a service or instance as a service. As far as resources to get started, we have multiple learning tutorials. If you go to the Azure SQL documentation page, as well as the Azure SQL workshops and the recent learning experiences that Anna, Buck, and Bob did, more on learning from fundamentals for beginners, various data exposed events. So all of these give you multiple learning paths for getting complete knowledge and experience in Azure SQL. Thanks. Back to you, Anna.
Thanks, Ajay. Now, this next question that's come in is kind of vague, but the question is, how do I know the best migration strategy to use? Mukesh, I think you could take this one.
Absolutely. This is a great question. Again, it's subjective in nature, but first resource to refer, we would highly encourage you to refer database migration.microsoft.com. This ties back to all the Microsoft Docs postings that we keep up to date, right? For you to get started with basic strategy, right? To modernize SQL Server on-prem onto cloud. On database migration.microsoft.com, you can find out, you can select a source, you can select a potential target, and it will walk you through specific phases, starting from before you migrate, start migration, to pre-migration, to migration and post-migration, step by step, engineering prescribed next steps, right, that you can rely on. That would be one resource to refer. Back to you, Anna.
Awesome. Thanks, Mukesh. This next question is coming from Kevin. Kevin asks, Azure SQL database migration option. What is your feeling on using transactional replication / continuous sync? I think, I'm not sure who to pass this one to. How about Raj, you want to take that?
Sure, thank you so much, Anna. Hello, Kevin. So basically, transactional replication is a great technology that you can certainly use for migrations. There are few caveats, though, in the sense where that we have really seen with our customers is, especially when you are really having a very large database, replication involves like two steps. One is you need to establish a snapshot at first so that you can really do a full data load, and then the ongoing transactions will get updated onto the target Azure deployment. The initial snapshot might take a little longer for the very large databases. And also replication has a few requirements in the sense your table should have a primary key and as well as the unique index so that it can be part of the replication. And if you don't have primary key and the unique indexes for some of those tables, then you may need to fall back into the CDC technology for those kind of tables. That's where the DMS really combines both technologies so that it really helps you to leverage replication and as well as the CDC wherever the replication cannot be leveraged. That way you can really use, but you can certainly try using transactional replication for migrations for sure. Back to you, Anna.
Thanks, Raz. This next question also comes in as anonymous. It is, where can I find the latest tools to see on Power BI the results of my data migration assistant? So I'm guessing they're using DMA and they're trying to see if they can see their results in Power BI. Mukesh?
I would actually hand it over to Raj.
Okay, Raj.
Yep, sounds good. We published, so with the DMA tool, what happens is that if you really want to summarize the assessment results across your data estate, one way to do is you can assess all the SQL servers using the DMA and then upload them into a SQL Server database, and then you can really execute some nice Power BI reports on the top of it, so that you can really find out the relative readiness of those databases, how ready those databases are migrating to a specific target that you have. So those still exist. We still support them. But in recent days, we really integrated our assessment results into Azure Migrate service, which I kind of mentioned in my demo, where you can start uploading all these assessments to Azure Migrate, and Azure Migrate will really give that kind of summary view, so that you don't have to go through the pain of using the Power BI and then generating the reports using the Power BI and all those tools. And then again, in the next few months, we are putting more investments into Azure Migrate to bring that experience more seamless across the SQL discovery and as well as the assessments. Back to you, Anna.
Thanks, Raj. This next question comes from Rajesh, and I think really any of you could take this question, so we'll just see who feels like answering it. Rajesh says, is there any number of concurrent connections limitation for a database in Azure SQL?
Yeah, I can take that, Anna. So that's a good question. So that really depends on the deployment choice. So if you're using the single database model where you can choose between standard tier and business critical or premium tiers or general purpose, you do have a number of concurrent connection limit. If you look up the Azure SQL resource limit documentation page, it tells you what the limit is depending on the platform choice. However, if you go to managed instance or SQL Server on an Azure virtual machine, you're limited by whatever the entire instance supports, which is more than 30,000 connections, which is same as your on-premises SQL Server.
Awesome. Thanks, Ajay. That really helps clear that up. This actually brings up another question that I think is important to call out because I've seen it a few times. Oftentimes we get questions, SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine, SQL Database, SQL Managed Instance. How do I pick which one is going to be best when I migrate?
Yeah, let me take that again. So that's a fantastic question. Azure SQL has been in the market for more than a decade now with plenty of deployment choices, whether you're starting with a single database, a managed instance, virtual machines, and multiple different SKUs and tiers within the PaaS side. When customers get started, they're always interested in understanding how do you pick the right target. We are building some of this experience in our migration tools that Raj shared earlier. But meanwhile, as you are making that decision, there are a couple of critical questions you need to answer. The first one is, what level of control do you want? Do you want an environment where you want to manage the whole environment, such as upgrades, patching, pick your own version of SQL Server or the operating system, and run other applications along with SQL? Then virtual machines is the right target for you, which gives you a full SQL Server experience that you have on premises today, minus the infrastructure, which is managed by Microsoft for the compute, storage, and networking. However, if you do not want to take the burden of managing the infrastructure or the hosted operating system, but just want to manage your SQL Server application, then you can pick either a database or a managed instance. Again, here the decision becomes what level of features your application needs. If you're using instance level features in your application, examples like replication or SQL agent jobs or CLR, etc., then you would pick managed instance. If you want only database level features for your application, then you can go to single database. On the PaaS side, both database and managed instance are built on the same service fabric, which means you get all the built-in capabilities of compute, storage, networking, upgrades, patching, built-in high availability and backups with configurable retention and region, etc. Plus, you can also exchange your on-premises licenses using Azure-only benefits such as Azure Hybrid Benefit and Reserved Instance. So these are some high-level questions and guidance to get you started. And then you can fine-tune your choice on specific tiers such as general purpose, business critical, serverless, or hyperscale, depending on your workload, which some of our migration assessment tools will help you with. Thank you.
Thanks, Ajay. Ajay actually did a session as part of Ignite. It's one of the pre-recorded breakout sessions called Azure SQL, What to Use When, and Updates from the Product Group. So if you are interested in learning a little bit more about that topic and also seeing all the new capabilities that we've added this Ignite, I definitely recommend you go check out that session. It's available for on-demand viewing whenever you have the chance. Now, if I look at the other questions, we have this next question. This is an interesting one coming from James. James says, what about the use of availability groups or distributed availability groups to add Azure as an option to migrate or as a way to extend into Azure? Would you have any recommendations or suggestions on how to do this? Any one of you in particular want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that one again. So I'm assuming
Ajay.
the question is to set up availability groups between on-premise SQL Server and the PaaS side, such as managed instance. That capability is not available today. You can do that with virtual machines. This is something a lot of customers have given us feedback on, and we are looking to see how we can provide such a capability in the future. So right now, not available, but something to look forward to in the future.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, other part of the question is, should they a recommended approach for just adding this setup with Azure or Azure DR, right? Extension to Azure, both are an option, right? You can very well go and set up, as Ajay said, full-blown IS SQL VMs with always-on availability group, and you can also extend between on-prem and VM on Azure for SQL assets. Both are an option for you. It depends on precise use case. Back to you, Anna.
Awesome. Thanks, Mukesh, and thanks, Ajay. Great answers. Now we have a few questions coming from Paul R. from Austin, Texas. I like that you put your location in there. I know Bob Ward's on the chat, so maybe you'll get a Go Cowboys from him, but not from me. But Paul says the migration choices are challenging. We know we need to migrate a lot of data to the cloud, transaction data for apps and for BI reporting, but we need to know which path to even start with. Let's see, maybe Raj, do you want to take that one?
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Anna. We definitely acknowledge that the migration path is which path really works for you is kind of a challenging, and kind of Ajay briefly mentioned when it comes to Azure SQL when to migrate to where, right? Which option? Because if we have several number of deployment options in the whole Azure SQL. In one way, it is a good thing that you have choice of options, that we have a solution for every business issue, problem that you are bringing into it. But at the same time, it also brings a lot of challenges as well. So he kind of answered which target deployment option that you would really want to choose depending on your needs. But at the same time, we're also trying to automate some of these options for you so that you don't have to juggle between these multiple options. And at some point of time, the question comes, which migration tools that you will be using as well, right? So these are all a bunch of questions that comes to your mind. We are trying to automate as much as we can, but this is the problem. Something is not can be solved just through the automation, right? It is definitely a question of people, process, and technologies that you are going to use. What are the factors that are really driving your migration at the end of the day? Are we trying to migrate the entire data center? Are we really trying to modernize the applications to begin with? So it all depends on other factors as well. But what we are doing as a team here at Microsoft is we are trying to automate the process of looking at your existing workload and finding out those characteristics. And based on those characteristics, we are trying to really come up with a target setup that you can really migrate to, which really meets your performance requirements, high availability requirements, and other business critical requirements that we can recommend. And we also going to recommend the specific migration route that or path that you can take. Yeah, we're trying to automate, but again, it's a beyond the automation. It is people, process, technologies, and the factors which are really driving your migrations. Thanks, Sarah.
Awesome. Thanks, Raj. So looking at the questions, I just want to let everyone know we have about 10 minutes left, so please continue to send your questions in. This next question comes again from Paul R. He says, can you speak about some of the licensing differences? I know the capability is tiered, but is there storage or number of transactions and or number of concurrent users that might impact your licensing? I think this is something that Mukesh, you might be able to help with.
I would redirect it to Ajay or Bob.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can take that, Anna.
Sure. Thanks, Ajay.
So licensing is, I'm assuming if you're talking about the PaaS side, this is the pay-as-you-go model. As we discussed earlier, different SKUs in Azure SQL on the PaaS side, if you go to the resource limits page, the link that Bob shared earlier in the chat, you can see the resource limitations based on which tier of SQL you pick, whether it's standard, general purpose, business critical, or premium. So that's the main difference. And in the DTU model, the licensing is completely abstracted because all you have to do is pick the DTU tier, and all these resources are automatically capped based on that. If you are coming to the vCore model, the license is, if you have existing SQL Server license and if you have software assurance, you can exchange your license for equivalent vCores. So that's just for the compute tier, whereas all the other aspects such as storage and throughput is basically dependent on how much of storage layer you pick, on which tier you pick, like whether general purpose versus business critical, if you want more IOPS, and also the number of concurrent users, number of concurrent requests is what changes depending on the tier you pick, because it's tied to the number of cores you spin up for your compute layer. I hope that's the answer you're looking for.
Awesome. Thanks, Ajay. This next question is for Raj. This user is moving to SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machine, but wondering if there are any benefits that they get when they move to an Azure Virtual Machine. So I'm guessing they're wondering if there's any added benefits running your SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machine versus just any old virtual machine somewhere else. Raj, is that something you can take?
I can take it as well. Azure SQL virtual machines really give you a complete control. They give you complete control at your operating system level and as well as at the SQL Server instance level. If your applications is something that requires, or a business applications that require this kind of a complete control, then you can certainly migrate to VMs. But at the same time, with the recent improvements that we really make with the Azure SQL VM, you can really get a lot of benefits in the sense you can get a free disaster recovery node and as well as the free high availability node that you can really leverage without really paying the licenses for those by migrating to SQL VMs. And at the same time, you can also really start applying the hybrid licenses as well. Back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Raj. Let me take a look at what's coming in. Okay, so we have this question. It's anonymous. They say, this may be specific to just me, but when I run DMA, oh, I lost it. Give me 1 second. Okay, this may be specific to just me, but when I ran DMA, I get notifications like use SQL Server agent to run SQL Server PowerShell scripts at scheduled times. It's used an SFTP process. What would you suggest as a replacement process for MI to download files? And then there's the second part of that question, but maybe for the first part, can anyone help with that? Otherwise, we might have to take that one offline.
Yeah, I can relate to it. I might not be able to answer. This is Raj. I may not be able to answer completely, but I think you're referring to the feature parity report that we provide when you do an assessment with an intent that you want to migrate to SQL MI. If there are any PowerShell related sub jobs within your SQL Server agent jobs, we really flag that we don't really support on the MI target. So that is where you might want to try to refactor some of those jobs before you migrating to managed instance. So in managed instance, we definitely support the SQL Server agent jobs with the T-SQL jobs, and there are some types of other jobs might not be supported, but I think that is what you might be referring to. But if you really want more detailed answer, then you can really contact us at dmsfeedback@microsoft.com so that we can really give you much more direct answer for that.
Awesome. Thanks, Raj. This next question says, I have heard that Azure Database Migration Service supports online migrations. Does this use log shipping? Raj, I think this is another one that you might be able to take.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So it all depends on the specific source and target that you are migrating to. For example, if you are migrating to a managed instance, we use backup and restore technology. So we use the full backup to do the full load, and then we use the subsequent log backups to really synchronize the ongoing transactions that are happening to your source and target, so that we keep doing that until you are ready to do the cutover. So that is one technology that we use when you are migrating to managed instance. But whereas if you are migrating to a SQL DB, where we completely use a different method, where we really use the bulk copy functions to really do the full load, and after that we use the transaction, the transactional replication, and as well as the CDC techniques to do the continuous sync. So it all depends on which source and target pair that you are migrating to. Back to you, Anna.
Thanks, Raj. I think there's another question here that would be good for you, actually, Raj. It says, I'm planning a large data center migration. Is there an easy way to do a discovery and assessment of my estate for all my apps and SQL servers?
Yep. So as you might have seen my demo, where we kind of showcased some of the tools that really help you to do the data-centric discovery, and as well as do the assessment, and also gives you the application dependency matrix, like for a given LOB application, which of the servers that you need to migrate together. So all that you can really do through Azure Migrate service, a fully managed service on the Azure that is completely free for you. So you can simply go to Azure portal and then provision that Azure Migrate service, and it comes up with a simple appliance kind of an experience where you can really install that in the on-prem, and then that will take care of your discovery and then also the application dependencies, and also it gives you the Azure readiness assessment as well. So please go ahead and try that out. If you run into any issues, please contact us back. Over to you.
Thanks, Raj. This next question is asking the following. They say, I'm trying to migrate to Azure SQL database and trying to determine which service tier I should go to based on my existing workload. Raj, Mukesh,
yep. No,
you got it, Raj? Thanks.
Yeah, I can take that answer too. I can take that question too. So great question. So in order to find out the right SKU that you wanted to really migrate so that it can really meet your performance needs and as well as the high availability needs, that is a very critical step in your migration journey. You want to make sure that you really land at the right size of the target or right SKU so that you don't really run into any post-migration issues, right? And then if you look at our data migration assistant tool, DMA tool, that really help you to assess your existing workload characteristics by collecting some kind of a performance data that really represent your peak load, and then will give you the recommendations around what specific SKU size that you can really migrate to, so that it can really meet your performance or exceed your performance for your business workload, right? It supports both SQL DB as a target and as well as the managed instance as a target, which I briefly showed in my demo. But we also have some videos on the YouTube where I really went very deep into that particular topic. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Raj. And thank you to everyone who submitted questions and to everyone who answered the questions, whether on the chat or in the live video feed. We're really glad you could join us today. We put up a bunch of resources and ways you can get into contact with us. We hope this was useful, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your Ignite. Thank you, and have a good morning, evening, good night.